Yesterday on Sportcenter, the big story that immediately caught my attention was about the Houston Rockets. And I've got to tell you, the tone of the conversation was serious, because this wasn't just another small injury update. It was the confirmation that Fred VanVleet is expected to miss basically the entire season after suffering an ACL tear. The way the panel put it, it's one of those moments that can shift the direction of a franchise, especially when it happens before the season even tips off. They made the point that injuries like this don't wait for the grind of the regular season. They can happen at any moment, even during off-season workouts or conditioning sessions. And this year in particular, it feels like there's been an unusual wave of off-season setbacks, with several notable names around the league going down before the first official practice. Maybe it just feels heavier because some of the names are bigger this time around, but the sense was clear. This is going to have ripple effects in Houston. Now, when it comes to the Rockets, the crew on Sportcenter didn't sugarcoat it. VanVleet isn't just another rotation piece. He's one of their leaders, a foundational voice in that locker room, and the guy tasked with running the offense, setting the tone, and giving structure to a very young team. But at the same time, they stressed something interesting. While losing him is a gut punch, it doesn't necessarily mean Houston's season is over. This isn't like losing your franchise cornerstone, like if Alperen Sengun or one of their other main offensive engines went down. VanVleet is more of a high-level role star, a stabilizer who can elevate the rest of the group, but not the kind of player who single-handedly defines their ceiling. That being said, the conversation quickly shifted to how this changes Houston's rotation and what it could mean for the Western Conference picture. The Rockets don't exactly have the flexibility to go out and grab another high-profile guard. They're tight financially, in a situation that's not all that different from what the Lakers often find themselves in. Limited room to maneuver, relying heavily on internal development. So, what's the solution? According to the panel, a lot of pressure now falls on Reed Sheppard. He's young, untested at the NBA level, but he has the skill set that could actually end up raising Houston's ceiling if he develops quickly. Why? Because one of Houston's biggest issues last season was shooting and consistent offense. VanVleet, for all the leadership and steady play he brings, isn't known as a knockdown shooter. He can get hot in stretches, but he's never been the kind of three-point sniper that consistently stretches defenses. Sheppard, on the other hand, has the potential to both initiate the offense and be a more reliable off-ball threat. And when you think about how this Rockets roster is constructed, that actually might fit better with what they need. The panel even drew comparisons between VanVleet and players like Gabe Vincent, solid, defensive-minded guards who can initiate and keep the offense moving, but who aren't really dynamic scorers or high-level playmakers. That's valuable, but it's not irreplaceable, especially for a roster stacked with length, defense, and young athleticism like Houston has. The Rockets are one of the longest teams in the entire league, with wingspans everywhere you look, and they already pride themselves on defense. That means they might be able to cover for Sheppard's defensive shortcomings as he adjusts, while at the same time unlocking more offensive potential than they would have had with VanVleet as the primary ball handler. So, the feeling on Sportcenter was this: yes, it's a brutal loss. Yes, it changes things, but it doesn't bury Houston. In fact, it could accelerate the development of players like Sheppard, Amen Thompson, and even Jabari Smith Jr., while putting even more responsibility on Sengun to become that offensive hub. And from a Lakers perspective, this is something to keep an eye on, because the Rockets were already going to be one of the teams fighting for positioning in the West. Any shift in their hierarchy, whether it helps them or hurts them, is going to impact how things shake out for LA. On Sportcenter yesterday, the conversation didn't just stop at Fred VanVleet's injury. They really dove into what this means for Houston moving forward, and I thought the breakdown was fascinating. One of the biggest points they raised is that while losing VanVleet removes stability and leadership, Houston has actually layered in other players who can step into that role. Kevin Durant, for example, was brought in to be both a superstar presence and a steadying hand. He can assume some of that leadership mantle on the floor, while still being the elite scorer that takes pressure off the younger guys. But the name that kept surfacing was Reed Sheppard. On Sportcenter, they made it clear that his offensive potential is what could really elevate the Rockets beyond what many people expect. Van Vleet is steady, but Shepherd brings the kind of shooting and off-ball movement that could actually unlock more from the starting lineup. The panel pointed out that if Shepherd proves he can handle NBA defenses and quickly adapts to that playmaking role, Houston might end up with a higher ceiling than they had with Van Vleet running the show. And don't forget about Amen Thompson. Without Van Vleet, there's now space for him to take on more on-ball responsibility, which could accelerate his growth as well. The question is timing. How quickly can those guys adapt? That's where the skepticism came in. The panel wasn't ready to say Houston is cooked, but they admitted that without Van Vleet, the Rockets' chances of being a true contender in the West become more complicated. Even with Kevin Durant and a strong supporting cast, the injury forces them to rely on unproven players in big roles. That's a gamble, no matter how talented they are. And then came the Lakers connection, which is where things really got interesting. On Sportcenter, they argued that this development is something Los Angeles should monitor closely, especially on the trade front. Why? Because the Rockets may eventually realize they need a stopgap solution at point guard, and the Lakers, almost quietly, have exactly the type of player Houston could use: Gabe Vincent. Now, Gabe Vincent isn't Fred Van Vleet, but stylistically, he fits the same mold. He can bring the ball up, initiate sets, knock down threes, and play hard-nosed defense. On Sportcenter, they even joked that Vincent is like the budget version of Van Vleet, but that might be exactly what Houston needs in the short term. His contract is modest, just over $11 million, and it expires soon. That makes him valuable because he could help Houston get through this season, then come off the books when Van Vleet returns and Shepherd develops. The panel floated scenarios where a deal might happen closer to the trade deadline, since many of Houston's veterans just signed new contracts and can't be moved yet. But once those restrictions lift, the Lakers could explore whether Vincent, and maybe even other pieces, could fetch them something from Houston's surplus of young athletic wing. That's where it gets intriguing. The Lakers need more depth on the wing, and Houston almost has too many of those versatile, long defenders. So, in theory, a swap could make sense for both sides. Of course, nobody's talking about Jabari Smith Jr. or any of the Rockets' top core guys being available. That's unrealistic. But if Houston feels like they need stability at the guard spot to stay in contention, someone like Vincent could be a perfect short-term solution, and the Lakers could use that opportunity to pry away a rotational wing who fits their system. For now, as the Sportcenter crew emphasized, it's about patience. Houston will want to see how Shepherd, Amen Thompson, and the rest of their roster handle this new challenge before rushing into a deal. But, from a Lakers perspective, this is a situation worth tracking because it could open a trade pathway later in the year that benefits both teams. The Lakers' situation with Austin Reeves is one worth monitoring closely. The idea floating around is that if another team, say Houston, finds itself with a crowded rotation or struggling to balance minutes, opportunities could open up. That could mean a player like Jabari becoming available in a package along with a draft pick, depending on how teams evaluate Reeves' value on the market. But from the Lakers' perspective, there's no rush. They want to see how Reeves looks alongside this group, how he handles his role both on and off the ball, and how his game fits within the bigger picture. At the same time, they'll be keeping a close eye on Houston. If the Rockets stumble or find themselves pressed to make a move, that's when the Lakers could strike. A team that feels pressure is usually willing to part with more value. There are different layers to this. If, for instance, Houston faces issues with players like their big men not getting the minutes or roles they want, that could create another angle for Los Angeles. Maybe that's where a deal comes together involving a veteran center or a versatile wing, pieces that would shore up the Lakers' depth. It doesn't have to be a blockbuster, but those kinds of secondary moves can end up being decisive. This is why patience is key. The Lakers know the season naturally brings change, whether it's through injuries, rotations not clicking, or teams realizing they need to reset their roster. Not every move happens because of a crisis. Sometimes It's just the evolution of the season that opens doors. Los Angeles wants to be in position to take advantage when that moment arrives. And when it comes to competition, they want every opponent at full strength. That's the mentality. Beating teams when they're whole, proving their success isn't tied to luck or weakened rosters. Injuries will always be part of the game, but ideally, opportunities to upgrade should come from natural roster shifts across the league. So, while nothing is imminent, the Lakers remain watchful. The season is long, situations change quickly, and as teams adjust, new trade paths are bound to emerge.